Hey everybody, it's a Monday evening here in New York City, and I wasn't completely happy with the last video that I did, hence there's going to be a part two. And my discussion of this topic will never grow old because my level of dissatisfaction in terms of the current learning model is extensive. Everybody is in a discussion about how to improve education. And everybody's got different ideas. But as I said, unless you admit what the problem is, you can't fix it. And the problem is the learning model that is currently in place in most public schools in this country. I don't want to go too deep into what the learning model actually is because it's going to take me off topic into a great criticism of that learning model and who designed it. And I don't want to do that. I just want to rather keep it focused on what I believe will make a positive change in how instruction is delivered to elementary school children in this country. Why elementary school children? Because that's the foundation for learning in this country. It's the elementary school. When children enter the first grade, that's the grade in which students learn to read. First grade is actually the most difficult grade to teach. There is no grade more difficult than first grade to teach because that's the grade where a teacher is assigned the task of introducing the alphabet to the students. And many of them have never seen the letters in the alphabet, and they have no idea the sounds that those letters make when they're reading a passage or a book. Now, I'm going to make it personal. When I entered school back in the day, in the 50s, I did not know how to read. I was not one of the children that was taught at home how to read. My mother didn't teach me how to read. I had to learn how to read in school. I didn't learn in kindergarten. Kindergarten was play. We learned in first grade. And back then, we had what was called a basal reader and a Think and Do workbook, which actually focused on reading comprehension. And it was a Scott Forsman basal reader, and young people won't even understand what I'm talking about, but some of the older seniors who are watching this will know what I'm talking about. We learned to read with See Jane Run, See Spot Run, those old books. And it worked. It worked. We all learned to read. By the end of the first grade, we could all read. We used a Scott Forsman basal reader. Then there were publishing companies that branched out, and they also created basal readers. So it became Bank Street readers, Ginn basal readers, Harcourt Brace, Houghton Mifflin, Scholastic. But basically, all of those readers were designed the same way. They had little short, interesting stories of about 5 or 6 pages. And the students would spend part of the day reading the story silently or having the teacher guide them through the oral reading of the story. And then she would ask questions to help them find the main idea, search for specific details, draw conclusions, maybe write their own endings for the stories that they had just read. And then they had a think and do workbook, which complemented some of the concepts in the stories. Now, there was also the teaching of phonics in the first grade. Now, what is that? That is actually teaching the students the sounds that the letters in the alphabet make. If you are not learning the sounds that the letters make, you won't be a proficient reader. You ever hear the old expression, sound out the word? If you don't know it, sound it out. What does that mean? It means sound it out based on the sounds that the letters are making. Well, let me tell you, they don't use that system anymore. They don't use it anymore. They use a completely different system. And I don't really think that there is the proper teaching of reading in the schools. I don't think there's the proper instruction. Students sit in groups. It's called socialized seating. I hated it. I despised it. Students sitting in groups of 4 facing each other. I wanted my students sitting in rows, facing the chalkboard, facing me at my desk. Do you know that in the classrooms now, teachers no longer have desks? There are no more desks. The teacher's not considered the provider of direct instruction. It's called, she can't any longer do what's called a teacher-directed lesson. She's the facilitator. They have all these buzzwords now. Quiet classrooms are not considered ideal. They want productive noise. They have all these buzzwords. They want word walls. Do you know that teachers spend hours decorating bulletin boards? I had a principal come in to my classroom at the end of my teaching career, and she had a clipboard, and she was walking around evaluating my bulletin boards to see if the work that was up on the bulletin boards was current. What does that have to do with the providing of excellent instruction? It's a facade. It's phony. It's fake. It's subterfuge. So it looks like something is going on. So it looks, the prettier the classroom is, viewers will be fooled. Ooh, look how nice this looks. It's so pretty. This must be a great classroom. I never wanted to do bulletin boards. It was caulk. I left it as caulk. I never covered them. Principal would come in and say, you have to cover the bulletin boards. I said, why? What does that have to do with anything? So I used to buy sheets of paper and cover the bulletin boards. What does that have to do with anything? It's like changing wallpaper. What does that have to do with anything? My students had loose leaf notebooks divided into sections. I taught cursive writing. They learned how to write script. Until you bring back the Basil reader, there will be no improvement in education. Until you stop trying to reinvent the wheel, there'll be no improvement in education. Until you swing back those students to be sitting in rows in quiet classrooms, there will be no improvement in education. Stop trying to reinvent the wheel. It won't work. Rooms don't need to be decorated like Sweet 16 parties. Then I had to do the bulletin board in the hallway. Why do you have to do a bulletin board in the hallway? What does that have to do with excellent education? Yeah, my students had loose leaf notebooks divided into sections. Reading, science, social studies, math, phonics, creative writing. They would go home with those notebooks. The parents could look through the notebook and determine exactly what the students had learned during the school day. I'm mad as hell. I create these videos. Very, very few people even watch them. But it's not that hard to fix. It's not a hard fix. And it really doesn't involve more money. What is more money going to do? It's a simple fix, and you can spend less money. You don't need computers in the classroom. You don't need them to bring their cell phones into the classroom, or whatever you call them, smartphones. I used to teach math to 5th graders. I taught fractions, decimals, percent, area and perimeter. And I taught, I think it was 5th grade, and I had the 6th grade teacher come to me and say, "You're the best math teacher in the school. When I get your students, they know their math." How did I teach? I didn't teach in a fancy way. I'll show you right now. I didn't teach fancy. I taught simple, at the chalkboard with a piece of chalk. I was a strong teacher. I knew how to structure a classroom. And I demanded a quiet classroom. Do you know, I guarantee, I taught fractions, percent, decimals, area and perimeter. I was such a great fraction teacher. Do you know, I bet you could give many adults this math problem, and without a calculator, they would not know how to do it. 15 take away 4 2/3. It was so easy to provide instruction in how to do that. I would say to the students, it's 15, go 1 down. So what's 1 down from 15? 14. Now look at the fraction, 2/3. Use the denominator to create another fraction to equal 1 whole, because 1 whole and 14 will equal 15. So what is that fraction using the same denominator? How many of you even know what a denominator is? It's the bottom part of the fraction. So what would that be to equal 1? 3/3. Now you can do it, because you don't subtract up, you subtract down. So 3/3 minus 2/3 is 1/3. And 14, take away 4, is 10. I taught it there. There it is, right there, a piece of chalk. It didn't cost $1,000. Then after I taught it and I reviewed it with them, using some other examples with different denominators, so they learned how to create a whole number plus a fraction to equal the number that I just put a line through. I would put 10 problems on the board and they would do it. It was so easy to teach. I spent 35 years of my life doing this. My students could read. And if they couldn't, I provided instruction in phonics, going over the sounds that the symbols make. Here's another one in math. 17 and 1/5 take away 2 4/5. Now I'm sure there are many that are watching me now that would think it's 3/5, but you don't subtract up, you subtract down. So you have to change that 1/5. And I would show them how you do it. You add the denominator and the numerator. So 5 plus 1 is 6. You add the denominator and the numerator, and you cross out the numerator, and you put the 6. And then you look at the whole number, and you go 1 lower than 17, which is 16. So 6/5 take away 4/5 is 2/5. And 16 take away 2 is 14. And there's your answer. There it is, right there. Because you don't subtract up. Many adults would go, well, it's 3/5, but you don't subtract up, you subtract down. So you have to change the 17 and 1/5 to be a whole number and an improper fraction. So it's 6 take away 4 is 2/5, and then 14 and 2/5. Then I'd load the board up with 20 examples after I taught it and provided excellent instruction. They could do it. And they all got 100. I taught fractions, decimals, percent, area and perimeter, and reading, and science, and social studies, and cursive writing. In rows, in quiet classrooms, with a textbook approach and a loose leaf notebook. And for most of my teaching career, I never bothered with the bulletin boards. I had no word walls or words hanging from a clothesline. Or their work up. Oh, the work has to be up on the bulletin board. What does that have to do with instruction? Putting their work up on bulletin boards and changing the work and keeping it current. It's a lot of nonsense. Go back to the old style of teaching. And I'm sure there were many parents out there who would agree with me and say the old way was better. How many parents would love to go into a school and see their child sitting in a classroom with a teacher who was able to keep a quiet classroom and order in the classroom and who was actually teaching? And they would all learn how to read. Bring back the Basil Reader. What happened to that Basil Reader? We stopped using Scott Forsman. We went to Bank Street. Then after Bank Street, we used Scholastic and Ginn. Then Harcourt Brace. Then Houghton Mifflin. All the same. They had the most beautiful stories with gorgeous illustrations. And they would do silent reading. Sometimes we would do oral reading. Sometimes I would put questions about the story up on the chalkboard. And there was a focus. The focus was the loose leaf notebook. You don't need a lot of money. Tear down the bulletin boards. Get them back into rows. As I started this video, I said, I did not grow up in a home where my mother taught me anything. And I didn't enter the first grade knowing the sounds that the symbols, which is the alphabet, made. I was dependent upon the instruction that was provided by my first grade teacher. Never forget her name, Miss McGlynn. Miss McGlynn at a school in Brooklyn. And she taught me how to read. I'm not saying you can't build some level of creativity into the day. You can have the students write their own endings for mystery stories. They could illustrate the stories. You can build creativity into it. But I want to conclude by saying there are many children out there just like me, children just like me, who enter first grade and have never seen the alphabet before. They don't know the sounds that the symbols make, and they are extremely dependent upon a competent teacher to provide instruction in reading. They come to school, they've never seen the alphabet. And for those students, like me, they need a different way of instruction. Now, the current learning model may work for students who are 3 years old, are taught by their parents how to read, and they have a home library, and then they can, when they get to school, it's a different situation. They can sit in groups and talk, but it doesn't work. It would not have worked for a child like me, and I'm sure for many other children who are going to schools in this country, this current learning model is a disaster. It's just a disaster. And that's why the schools are failing. And then you also need staff development to help teachers handle classes of sometimes 32 children, because that's not easy. It's not easy to handle a large class. I don't know if this is going to make a difference. Nobody really watches my videos, but maybe, just maybe, the right person will hear me, and maybe I can make a little bit of a difference. And that will make me very happy.